Our next presentation is going to be on the updates from the Green Shovels Collaborative, so building the case for investment in Phragmites management in Ontario. So we'll have Sarah Rang, Karen Alexander, Colin, Cassin, and Eric Cleland come up. And I'll just do a quick introduction here while you guys are getting set up. So Eric Cleland is the director of the Nature Conservancy of Canada's Invasive Species Program for the Ontario region. Eric currently leads implementation of Canada's largest invasive Phragmites management program in the Long Point area. Karen Alexander is the policy coordinator at the Invasive Species Centre. Karen has over 10 years of experience working with Phragmites control programs in the Great Lakes Basin. And Karen is also the co-founder of the Ontario Phragmites Working Group in 2011 and served as the co-chair. So I'm sure many of you are very familiar with Karen here. Sarah Rang is the executive director of the nonprofit Invasive Species Centre. Sarah has over 30 years of experience in conservation policy and programs. And then last but not least is Colin. Cassin is the Invasive Species Policy Manager at the Invasive Species Centre. Colin has worked in conservation and invasive species engagement for nearly 10 years. So definitely a lot of experience on this presentation. So I'll let you guys take it away and I'll be back for questions at the end.
Thanks very much, Gabby, for your kind introduction, and very much looking forward to presenting today. We are the Green Shovels Collaborative speaking today and really going to give you a bit of an update on some activities and really seeking your feedback in those activities. My name is Sarah Rang. I'm the Executive Director of the Invasive Species Centre. I'm delighted to be joined with my colleagues and many of the working partners of the Green Shovels Collaborative. So we'll take you through a little bit of a presentation on the updates in sort of 4 or 5 major areas, and then really looking forward to your contributions and thoughts about the work that is underway. I totally am awed by the amount of experience and expertise in the room and from the previous presentations who have so much knowledge about Phragmites. So really looking forward to your thinking on that. I'm wondering, Karen, if you might be able to advance the slides. So just a little bit of introduction on our Green Shovels Collaborative. We are a group of organizations that share an interest in invasive species. We started about a year and a half ago. Invasive Species Centre acts as a coordinator, but it is very much a collaborative effort through the organizations that you see here: Ducks Unlimited Canada, Federation of Ontario Codgers Association. Eric Cleland's joining us today from the Nature Conservancy of Canada. We've had great work done by OFAH, Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, and the Ontario Turtle Conservation Centre as well. So we got together because we really share an interest in invasive species management and started working in terms of a couple of different areas as well. Next slide, please, Karen. So just a bit of the history. We worked together to design really a menu of kind of shovel-ready and shovel-worthy projects on invasive species as a consideration to both the federal and provincial governments in terms of stimulus and job creation, and want to acknowledge and thank the funding from the Ministry of Northern Development, Mines, Natural Resources and Forestry, which has been so instrumental in supporting this effort. Last year, you might remember that we did give you a bit of an update on the progress of developing a Phrag strategy for Ontario. You have been very helpful in terms of working together to help put together the survey that guided much of that work. Very helpful in terms of the cost-benefit analysis that we'll be talking a little bit about today. So really wanted to acknowledge your help of many of you in the audience, and thank you for that, and give you a little bit of an update as to where that information has been incorporated and what we can do together next. We've also been working a little bit on new tools for invasive species management. So for today, we're going to focus, Green Shovels, we're working really in 2 main baskets, the Phrag strategy basket and innovative tools. Today, we're going to focus on the Phrag strategy basket, but encourage you to take a look at some of the work also that's coming out under innovative tools. largely led by many of our partners, OFAH leading on sort of wild pigs and some wild pig webcams that they have developed and have been very successful. So information is available on the website, greenshovels.ca. Next slide, please, Karen. So today we're just going to walk you through these main areas and really allow a little bit of time for next steps as well. So each person in the collaborative is going to kind of give you a little bit of an update of the projects that they're lead on. So we're gonna start with the strategic framework for coordinated management for Phragmites. And this work is led by NCC and Janice and her team at Invasive Frag Control Center. So I'll turn it over to Eric to take us through this part, and then Colin Cassin will take us through the cost-benefit analysis, and then we'll wind up at the end in terms of next steps. Over to you, Eric.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Great to hear some awesome presentations today. This is probably my favorite conference of the year. Maybe I'm biased in the Phrag world, but so much amazing volunteer effort going on out there. And we've been really happy with the Green Shovels Collaborative to really be able to support some of those efforts. I'm really pleased to hear some of the feedback on things like the application and reporting for the Invasive Frag Control Fund being simple for folks out there. So a big thanks for you for making the Green Shovels Collaborative real on the ground, and a big thanks to MNDRF for helping support important work. So the first thing I'm going to talk about here is the name of the strategy. So my intent today is to give you a bit of an update, since it's been a year since we last shared some information directly with you folks about the Phrag strategy, but just drawing your attention to the name, Ontario Phrag Free by 2033. Definitely an aggressive goal for all of us who are out there on the ground and have been managing Phrag for over a decade. Just one more decade might not seem like enough to finish off the province, but we have to have goals and we have to start somewhere. So next slide, please, Karen. So just as a bit of a reminder to everyone, the goal of creating a strategic framework for the province is really to get efficient and coordinated management of Phragmites on the landscape. As we all know from the presentations this morning and the mapping we saw when we started this effort a year ago, there's a ton of great work going on across the province. But what it might benefit from is additional coordination and at that local level, and bringing other partners to the table to really have a truly kind of leveraged approach to managing Phrag. So when we started this project, we had a few important objectives, and those were to describe the current state of Phrag as of January of 2021. And oh, can we go back a slide, please, Karen? Thanks. Yeah, we had the goal of describing the current state, developing a long-term framework for Phrag management. And really, it's very important that we demonstrate the value of doing this work. We all know the ecological value and the importance to biodiversity and species at risk and all of those great green reasons for doing this work. But what's the value to everyone else in Ontario who doesn't understand Phrag and isn't invested the same way we are? And you're going to hear more from Colin a bit about that later today. And we wanted to come up with some really innovative ideas on communication needs, training requirements that might be needed to help build capacity, and the outreach efforts that are required to roll this framework out across the province. And lastly, of course, we want to put some boots on the ground and make some more work happen. Slide, please, Karen. So really, it starts with understanding where we were. It's hard to build a strategy if you don't know where you're at. And that was the efforts that we worked with the Phragmites Working Group and the Ontario Invasive Plant Council last year through the AGMs. So about a year ago, we reached out to hundreds of you. You provided valuable input, completing our surveys, which was incredibly informative to the process. A number of you provided information and in-depth case studies of how you've delivered your work, what the successes were, where the opportunities for improvement are, and what lessons could be shared with others across the province. And lastly, we culminated all that into a workshop at the end of last January to kind of review that feedback and begin preparing a framework. Next slide. And so what does that framework look like? And some of you who had the opportunity over the summer of 2021 may recall some of the 5 goals that I'm going to speak to here today. But really, we tried to boil it down to critical goals and objectives. What does Ontario really need to be frag-free by 2033? And the first goal is coordination. We need everyone working together. This plant will beat us 1 for 1 if we approach it that way. But if we all work together, if our municipalities work with our conservation authorities and our non-government organizations and our volunteers, we can make a real difference in a landscape scale way, which we've seen from groups like Lambton and efforts at Long Point. So what do we need to be coordinated? Well, we need to make sure we're engaging all the right people, including our Indigenous communities and friends and neighbors, but also develop a governance model to make sure that there's a structure in place to help support all of the new fledgling Phrag programs that need to get started in areas where work's yet to be undertaken. We need to raise awareness. Everybody in this room knows Phrag inside and out, but it's not very hard. You don't have to reach very far outside your family or your friends or your network to find people who just don't know what Phragmites is still. So we have a lot of work to do in that front as well, developing communications. And sharing knowledge. One of the things we learned from that survey that you guys filled out last year was there's an incredible amount of knowledge out there, but there isn't the best platform available to get it to each other, to share, to learn, to share those learning outcomes and those lessons. So that's something that the Green Shovels Collaborative is promoting as well. For our second goal, and this may be the most critical goal in many of our eyes, is we need to prevent Phrag where it's not an issue yet, and I'm thinking about Northern Ontario here specifically. We need to ramp up control across the province and really take an aggressive approach if we're going to be successful in reaching a Phrag-free 2033 goal. And we need to monitor our actions. The presentation today from Dr. Rooney's lab really shows how important monitoring and research is to the success in the long term of managing Phragmites in the province. And so the objectives towards that goal are really, obviously preventing the new introductions and limiting the spread in areas where we can, providing funding to folks on the ground so we can get more Phrag actually controlled, and come format. So instead of everyone developing their own monitoring protocols, come up with something standardized that will not only improve the quality outcomes of the project, but also tell the story for Ontario so that we can measure year by year how is Ontario doing, a bit of a report card, if you will, for the annual progress. Next slide, please. For our third goal, those are a lot of activities, and one of the key things we need is funding to support this work. And that's probably going to have to be from a number of diverse sources, realistically. So it might include government investment, it might include private industry investment, it might include innovative new financing models like conservation finance or outcome-based financing models as well. I really think we're going to have to be innovative and forward-thinking in funding a program of this size in Ontario. The reality is we need a sustainable funding source to make this work. The other thing we need to make it happen is to make sure that we have all of the legislative and policy supports in place to deliver Phragmites in an efficient manner, to make sure that we can put the best management practices on the ground in as an efficient way as absolutely possible. So making sure that we have all of the permits we require, the processes are identified. Is there opportunity to streamline some of these processes or have landscapes-wide permits, for example, that would really enable the action of fraggers on the ground in a really flexible and efficient manner. And then lastly, never forget to continue to learn through research and innovation. Existing and new science opportunities really need to be supported and encouraged. And it's important that we're using these tools to demonstrate responsible management. Phragmites control is likely to have an herbicide component, and we need to demonstrate that we're doing it safely, effectively, and responsibly for not only for the outcome, but for future generations as well. Next slide, please. So where are we now? So those are the 5 goals we've built into a document, and we've turned a 100-page document into 2 slides. So you've very much got the Coles Note version there. Right now, that draft framework is out for provincial input, and we've received input from a number of ministries to date, and we're busy incorporating that, in particular from MTO, MNDRF, and OMAFRA. We're waiting on some feedback from MECP as well right now, given their valuable role in the oversight of herbicide application, but also species at risk in Ontario. We recently received some feedback from the federal government from our partners at Environment and Climate Change Canada's CWS arm, and we're incorporating that over the next couple of months. We've just started an Indigenous engagement strategy to really take a different approach at how this document is prepared and finalized, recognizing that two-eyed seeing is really a necessary way that we need to start leading all of our activities and our management proposals going forward. So we're working closely with a number of First Nations communities to bring that perspective into the document, and I'm sure it'll change the document and provide some really well-rounded support for managing Phragmites in some non-traditional ways. And lastly, we see municipalities as a critical supporter of delivering Phrag work, potentially as regional implementation plans roll out. So we're working with some important municipalities that are invested in Phrag management to get their feedback to make sure that the document actually works for them as well. Next slide, please. So, of course, we need financial support to do this work. And the Green Shovels Collaborative has been putting together a proposal for consideration by government levels, particularly the province, but also the federal government, recognizing that we're hoping that they see the value in this work. And that's where Colin's cost-benefit analysis is going to be incredibly important. The model that we are drafting right now includes staff, several different staff actually, including technical experts. So fraggers on the landscape that want to start a regional Phrag program have someone to go to reach out to understand all of the different steps that are important. Those steps we heard from those long-term projects earlier this morning. Someone to help guide those steps for all those new projects. And we see three critical areas where funding can be flowed if we're successful in receiving an investment in this program. And we see municipalities and other infrastructure management organizations. MTO might fit in this category as well, where Phrag is having a direct impact on infrastructure, whether it's roads or agricultural drains or ditches or even hard infrastructure as well. We see that as being a critical funding opportunity. We want to continue to support our friends at the Indigenous communities as well, to deliver Phrag management in a way that meets their goals and objectives, and in a way that is respectful to their culture as well. And lastly, one of the most critical areas of funding is to keep what's already going, that community-led action, all the folks that are here around the table today that have been volunteering and working so hard in the ditches and swamps and wetlands across the province. We want to continue to support that important work. So stay tuned for those next steps. Next slide. And I think I'll turn it over now to Colin to talk a bit about the cost-benefit analysis.
Right on. Thank you very much, Eric. And happy to be trying to live up and do justice to that. So hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Colin Cassin. I'm the policy manager with the Invasive Species Center. And very pleased to be giving you what I think is kind of the Coles Notes version of our cost-benefit analysis. So next slide, please, Karen. And did want to show some appreciation. I know many of the folks who are tuned in today have provided feedback on this, have reviewed this document, have supported the document's creation with so appreciate all of the time and effort that I know many of you on the call here have put into helping us get to this point. So the quick overview, I guess, of what is this cost-benefit analysis is it's really providing a few key outcomes here, but nothing more than being able to describe in a new fashion what could the vision and business case really for collaborative and comprehensive Phragmites action be, and what does that look like on the Ontario landscape? What are the costs? But most importantly, what are the benefits that we would collectively reap in a world where Phragmites was, we were Phrag free by 2033, as Eric says. And this is really a collective effort. It was led through the Green Shovels Collaborative, and the Invasive Species Center was happy to coordinate, but also want to highlight the critical work of Dr. Richard Vine, who's an environmental economist out of University of Guelph, who really took a lot of this data that we've all kind of scraped our file drawers for and put it together into a nice comprehensive story, which I'm going to try my best to overview quickly for you folks today. And so, as you may be aware, perhaps you've reviewed, and if so, again, another note of gratitude. We have produced this into a PDF document Eric mentioned before. So if you're curious on some of the finer points that I might not be able to speak to today in this forum, happy to pass it your way as well. And it is available on our website at greenshovels.ca. Next slide, please, Karen. And so, I think this is the vision for where we're trying to go with this, is just try and for the first time ever, really put all of the threads together that I think we all come across on individual project or site level basis, and try and weave them into a comprehensive story here about just how much is this costing us all collectively at a provincial scale to manage Phragmites. What are we currently investing? What would it take to invest in such a vision that Eric painted earlier today? And also, again, back to that key point about what are the benefits from, if we're considering agriculture to tourism and everything in between, what is the business case that could justify potentially a scalable action on Phrag? Next slide, please, Karen. And so as the name cost benefit analysis implies, of course, we're going to kind of look at this through a couple of approaches here. So the first bin here being, what are the costs and how can we estimate those? And I do use that word carefully there, just being that we are estimating the costs as best we can. Of course, if we were able to describe these in detail, it would be a slightly different exercise. So there are some assumptions that are made, and we're happy to kind of spell them out in greater detail within the context of the PDF document here. But one of the first challenges, it's probably an easy question to ask, a tougher question to answer, is just how much Phrag there is on the landscape here. And so when we're thinking about what are those control techniques being used, well, first of all, we need to understand as best we can approximately how much Phragmites is there across the province. And there's a number of great databases we can use to pull together that data. And again, appreciate if you contributed to us trying to answer that question. But we know there's, it is an estimate in every sense of the word in terms of the volume or the area of Phrag on the landscape. And of course, that's ever changing as well. And so some of the assumptions that we made to continue along here, we're making a stated assumption that all Phragmites can be controlled within the first year. Of course, we know that that's quite an assumption to make, and there's a more nuanced tale to be told with it. But of this exercise here, just wanted to state that assumption. Another assumption that we're making is that roads are controlled exclusively using herbicide plus mowing as a practice for them. And we understand, of course, there's variability across different conditions and different situations. So do want to state that as another assumption. And also, furthermore, another assumption being made, keeping in mind this document was developed literally right at the time before we had an aquatic herbicide in use, that wetlands were to be controlled using cut to drown methods. And so I do want to emphasize here that we're continuing to update this based on new information, new regulatory opportunities, et cetera. But just want to state that those are all assumptions to be made in the current model of what are the costs to control Phrag. Next slide, please, Karen. So let's look at some of the data here. So these are some of the outputs. There's a nice range in terms of trying to answer the question concisely. What would it cost us to control Phragmites at a provincial scale? The range of between 90 and 113 million gives us a fairly precise range, I suppose. And if we break that down in terms of how do we arrive at some of those ranges of costs, we broke it down into kind of three scenarios and settings. So one, if we're looking at highways, again, there's more detail on how did we arrive at the approximate cost per hectare within the report itself, but we used $1,200 per hectare. And in terms of total cost, we're looking at 1.8 million for highways. This is based on some of those assumptions that are stated earlier today, and we understand that the more data we have, we can continue to update this. In terms of rural roads, that's another large source in terms of where the work and investment would be required at just shy of 10 million. And wetlands, of course, being a little bit more labor intensive as the information is currently modeled out, being at about 79 million. Next slide, please, Karen. So that's what we have cost data. And again, there's a little bit more meat on the bones in terms of the actual report, but did want to speak as well to the benefits and how we arrived at some of those considerations. So of course, they're critically important here, and there's a wide range in terms of how we could perceive or start to calculate benefits. And we had to narrow the scope at some point. And so really what we're trying to do here is pick out 8 key sectors based on the feedback that was provided through, Eric mentioned the survey, the workshop that was hosted last year, thanks to the Plank Council, and a number of other sources. We tried to scope this down to a manageable subset. And so really what we're looking at here are 8 key sectors: agriculture, tourism and rec, property values, property taxes for municipal governments, the values of wetlands, stormwater management, ponds, road safety, fire hazards, and power outages. And we know that's not comprehensive, but again, arms around this at a manageable scale. So those are the 8 variables we chose to work with. Next slide, please, Karen. And so again, there's more information in the report, but the idea here is that within each of these subset, each of these categories, we're able to start to make some assumptions based on how we could describe the potential benefits related to each of those. And so you'll see in this first column here, we're going to see the categories, a more Coles Notes version description, I guess, of what each of the impacts related to those particular categories are, and as well some information on what the output value for each of those are. So we're seeing agriculture using, some of the examples that we're using to calculate that are reduced crop yields, delayed planting, and some of the ongoing challenges associated with moving water off of our landscape. We're valuing that at about $10 million. Tourism rec is another large driver. There's some great additional information within the report as well on that, but reduced capacity to use our water bodies for recreational opportunities. And we are trying to be as broad in a sense as possible, looking at recreational boating, swimming, bird watching, hunting, etc. And so we're valuing that at about $43 million. Property values here are a really important one. The one caveat I want to throw on this is that $357 million is reflective of a one-time benefit that would be reaped in a frag-free landscape across Ontario, whereas the other ones are annually recurring or annually accruing benefits. So just want to make that distinction. This in this table is the one-time only benefit. Property tax is particularly important, of course, to municipal governments who rely on property values as a key revenue generation source. And so we assess those values at approximately $4 million per year across Ontario. The value of wetlands, and we're looking for a few different factors here into assessing just the value of wetlands that would be reaped in a frag-free landscape at about $12 million here. Stormwater management ponds, I think this is a particular section we'd love to see strengthened a little bit more, but we were able to assess the value of Phragmites, or Dr. Vine was able to assess the value here on these stormwater management ponds at about $2 million for Phragmites in terms of the impact there. Road safety, there's a great description of what's within play within the report itself regarding road safety here, but really I think the big one would be about reduced visibility and the impact and projecting the number of incidents that occur on our roadways, of course, and we're assessing that through the report at about $40 million. And last but not least, fire hazards and associated power outages. I think we've come across a few great examples of that, but just trying to document the impact of Phrag on that as another category is assessed at about $2.5 million. Next slide, please, Karen. So we start to put those two ideas together. Here's where we really start to see, and now I think this is a figure that we're all quite familiar with, is that in terms of return on investment, there's ample return on investment in terms of prevention or early detection and rapid response, which would be kind of more of the left side of this chart, of course, versus the well-established eradication moving towards the upper right, and that associated costs change over time. What this slide's trying to do here really is sum up that, we're trying to tell a complicated story that changes over time, but as per the report and how we kind of assess some of these costs and assess some of these benefits with known caveats and explanations on each, is that we're looking at estimated costs somewhere in the $100 million range, 90 to 110 to be a little bit more precise. All of those costs in this theoretical application here would be applied in year one. And if we're looking at what are the benefits, annually we're looking at about $113 million. Again, that's accruing every single year, in theory in perpetuity in a frag-free landscape, a frag-free world. plus applying that one-time 357 million, quite a large individual property owner benefit. So in year one, if we take those two numbers together, we had 113 up plus the 350. We're already well into the $400 million in terms of benefits that we could be perceiving in year one in a frag-free landscape versus the theoretical cost of around $100 million. Next slide, please, Karen. So there are limitations and there are gaps with this kind of an exercise. It would be difficult or impossible really for us to describe exactly with precision how much Phragmites is out there on the landscape. Of course, you're well familiar. That's a really challenging question to answer, but we do need to make some assumptions. But with that being said, we'd love to reduce our assumption and we'd love to add additional detail just to again, make this a little bit more robust as time goes on. And of course, things are changing, costs are changing, access to new tools are changing. So we'd love to see this, what was a preliminary report, be updated to a more final version in the months ahead. And so to get to that point, there is a call to action here. For continued support. Your data is really valuable and strengthens this exercise for us to be able to present a more robust and continually strengthened case for business here for a really ambitious vision that Eric rolled out in the first section of our presentation here. So we'd love to get more data from you. There's a few key gaps that I'd love to point out, but any and all data is of course always welcome. So a couple key things that aren't factored in here is what is the value of a species at risk? How are we considering that? And how are we empirically stating that and building that into this kind of an exercise? As well, a little bit more information would certainly be welcome on what is the value of a stormwater pond and what is the Phragmites maintenance schedule related to that? What are some of the costs associated with keeping stormwater assets or other municipal assets more broadly frag-free or not as impacted by frag, perhaps would be the better way to say it. So we'd love to get more data. We appreciate that this takes a lot of effort to put together and coordinate, but we certainly hope that you see the value in contributing to this kind of a project. And again, more and more appreciation to show for everyone who's collectively put in data to this exercise since its origins last year. Next slide, please, Karen. So to this end, we just an idea here, and Karen, if you could drop that question in the chat here, or sorry, the Q&A function. Just looking for a very slight informal idea here, poll the audience in a sense. We'd love to get together anyone interested in putting their data into this sort of a model, this sort of an exercise. So just looking for a very coarse level of interest in a drop-in session, sit in with us, give us your data, help us understand how you got to those points. For us to work through it and do the work of integrating it and incorporating it. So Karen, if you could throw that in there, and just looking for a bit of an upvote if that's of interest to you. So we'll leave that in the Q&A function as we continue on here. And in terms of targets, we certainly don't have a date set, but if you're interested in this, please feel free to reach out to Karen. Great, thank you. Please feel free to reach out to Karen via her email address there or any one of the Green Shovels Collaborative members. Next slide, please, Karen. Okay, great. That's me again here. So just a couple quick notes to pass along on the invasive Phragmites control fund rollout. Next slide, please. And so just a very high level update here, but did want to make note of it just to keep everybody in the fold on progress on the invasive Phragmites control fund. I'd love to, as well as my co-presenters, have acknowledged the funding of MNDRF. Really, this work obviously wouldn't have happened without their financial support and other in-kind support as well from some of their staff. So just want to show appreciation that it enables the Green Shovels Collaborative to be able to roll out this kind of a program. We have such strong advocacy happening there for this kind of great work that's happening and directly direct efforts at the community level here to support good projects on the ground. So did want to make note as a bit of a quick update from what happened last year, what's happening this year or happened this year, and hopefully some thoughts for the future. So last year, there was an invasive Phragmites control fund launched. There were about 10 projects that received funding. The total amount was approximately $50,000 combined amongst all projects. And do want to make note as well, beyond that, there was an additional $20,000 that the Federation of Ontario Cottagers Associations was able to roll out to some of their some of their member organizations, local lake stewardship type groups, to start to build their own Phragmites programming. So we're really pleased to see some of the awesome results on the ground there. And fast forward into the late last summer, we're able to roll out a second round, and that was a little bit larger, is a little bit more of an investment than the first rollout. So in that, there were about 12 projects that were supported through that. A little bit higher in terms of cumulative value there, but just some tremendous on the ground work. A wide range of projects we were able to support through that in this fiscal year. Projects from supporting a few municipalities to creating their own kind of stewardship kits and stewardship programs, to supporting some local community Phrag champions to be able to support some of their volunteers with herbicide applicator training, some tools and resources, some species at risk survey works that jump out to me as some other projects that were eligible and ultimately supported. So just wanted to make note, fantastic work that's happening on the landscape there, and so pleased to see some of those. We're happy to turn some of those outputs in terms of final reports into more public facing documents. So happy to share that kind of information once it becomes available towards the end of this fiscal year, just so we can all be a little more up to speed on the great work that was enabled and supported there. And in terms of looking forward, I think we've got some great feedback, as Eric mentioned there, just as well to pass on. We'd love to see this be able to be supported again next year. Of course, there's some other factors at play here, but would love to work with this group to continue to roll out that kind of a program in the future, should we be so fortunate. So just to keep your ears open, and happy to distribute information through this group and this medium here in terms of finding a path to supporting some additional projects next year if we can. So just wanted to make note of that. Looking forward, we love the results, and just wanted to say congratulations to everybody. Great work happening on the landscape there. Next slide, please, Karen. And Karen, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Colin. Hi, everyone. And I guess I'm tasked with introducing a new program in development this year called, I guess we'll just call it for now, the DNA Screening Service Program. And this, like I said, is in development. The Invasive Species Center is taking the lead on this project with the support of the Natural Resources DNA Profiling and Forensics Center at the Trent University. So just a bit of background first. The need for this program emerged after a number of reports were coming in from land practitioners in Ontario that the native Phragmites is increasingly observed with dominant characteristics. And, you know, we heard that again today in some of our presentations earlier this morning. And so it's becoming a challenge for some land managers to confidently identify using the morphological characteristics whether the plant or the stand is native or invasive and needs to be managed. And Dr. Freeland looked into this a couple of years ago, and she's with the University of Trent as well. And her lab looked specifically at whether the plant, or whether we could explain this observation in the field as hybridization. So the question of whether native and invasive Phragmites is hybridizing in Ontario. So she explored that. And using 127 plants, samples were sent in from around the province. So thanks to those who participated in that program, they found 114 native and 13 introduced, and no evidence of hybridization occurring in Ontario. So they also looked, they also had the samplers collect morphology characteristics, and were able to confidently determine that native Phrag is not developing a wider range of morphological characteristics either. So what she concluded was that native plants possibly are having a more diverse growth pattern, which could be the case. She was back then referencing some literature suggesting native Phrag in its native range can become problematic. So that could be the case here in Ontario as well. The other point she made with this research is that native plants could also just becoming increasingly dominant, which is the one that seems to line up with what's being observed in Ontario. But you know, that study and that research, you know, you could sum that up and say we have a ongoing challenge for land managers in the province to confidently manage invasive Phragmites while protecting the native Phragmites. So we're investigating and piloting this year this new service program to protect the native Phragmites that's out there while we go about controlling invasive Phragmites. So we're looking to develop this DNA screening test, and it's a screening test. It's a new technique that's coming out of the I guess the DNA world, and it's not a full genotype, but it does, we think, does well enough to determine invasive, native, or hybrid strands. So we have some funding to purchase 200 kits for Ontario managers, and they'll be processed at the Trent University lab. One of the things that is important to know is that there's only 200 kits. So we do have a limited amount of resources here. So we're going to be kind of working in the next couple of months with Trent University to put together in the kit or pre-distribution of kits some flow charts or a checklist to help land managers better determine whether they really truly need this test going forward. And hopefully we can, provide some support to some managers out there really struggling with this question and protect that native genotype. So not much else to share at this point. We're developing the background and the resources of the program right now. So we do have the intention of getting ready to distribute those kits April, June. The lab needs fresh leaf samples to process the samples well. So we're thinking, as long as those who are interested in participating receive those kits in early June, and we'd like to probably set a deadline to get the samples back to the Trent University lab, sometime in early July. We're aiming to get answers out to those participants, in time for management this year. End of August is what we think may be doable. And I guess I should mention that the program right now is free of service, thanks to the Green Shovels Collaborative and funding made available from the Ministry of Natural Resources. We're able to do that. Even the postage will be covered for you to send your samples in. So that's fabulous. And we look forward to working with those who are really struggling to identify native or not native. What we're going to do is promise to have some more information posted on our website by February 18th. So while I wanted to have a sign-up process today, I'm settling for a question in the Q&A. If you think that you might participate in this program this year, if you could just vote for that question, I think Colin's going to drop it in for me. That would be helpful for us to kind of gauge a sense of how many people might be interested in utilizing this service this year, and help us do some good planning. And in the meantime, happy to answer any questions. And thanks very much. So I'll pass it back to Sarah at this point for the next series of slides. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all. So that's a bit of a tour of some of the work under Green Shovels. I just wanted to leave you with one last project that we're working on. And it relates to a common need that we all have in terms of trying to ensure that there's investment in Phragmites management. So we've begun a project and welcome your thoughts on it in cooperation with the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Governors and Premiers, Quantified Ventures, Nature Conservancy, and ourselves as coordinators, to try and use some of the new expanding conservation finance thinking that's happening across the globe and applying that to invasives. And in this particular project, we're applying it to Phragmites. So the idea is basically to use some new innovative methods to help us with our common need in terms of financing the efforts on Phragmites. We've been running a series of webinars on this, and I'm hoping that some of you might have been able to attend. If you haven't, don't worry. They are up on our YouTube channel, the ISC YouTube channel. And we're also going to be doing a deep dive on this topic at the upcoming invasive species forum, Feb 1st to the 3rd, and that information is on our Invasive Species Center website. Briefly, this allows different people who benefit from Phragmites eradication or control to come to the table to kind of share the efforts and pay for really the outcomes that they would like to have. It's using some of the new methods that are in place around the globe and starting in Canada in terms of environmental impact funds or environmental impact bonds to help provide sort of a continuing source of sustainable funding. We're at the beginning stages of the thinking of this project and welcome your ideas and thoughts on it as well. So that's next slide, please, Karen. So just to kind of wrap up and allow a bit of time for discussion, we're just going to review and some next steps as well. So here you have some of the work that we've, some of the different individual projects under the Green Shovels banner. If you wouldn't mind just going back there, Karen. The first one is the framework that Eric talked about. That if you're interested in reading about that, please do. It is on the greenshovels.ca website. It is a continuing work. As Eric had mentioned, we're working to involve municipalities, Indigenous groups, and of course, many of you in the audience in terms of making sure that framework reflects and is relevant to your work. The cost-benefit analysis, we are continuing to refine the cost and the benefits and hoping to do that through a one-day workshop where we can roll up our sleeves and make sure that we've got the right estimates based on current information. On the Invasive Frag Control Fund, we're delighted to have been able to support some groups here in the audience and looking forward to rolling that up, looking at some of the key performance indicators and also hoping to extend that fund as well to help local support this summer and fall. The DNA screening services, you heard a little bit about. Please indicate your interest and we'll certainly be sharing more details with you as that process rolls out. And on the last one, the innovative financing mechanisms, please don't hesitate to look on our YouTube channel, attend the forum if you want to walk through it in a bit more detail or indicate your interest in kind of helping shape this new idea of how we could work together on innovative funding proposals. Next slide, please, Karen. So just wanted to thank you and welcome your comments. Thank many of the partners that have brought us along to this stage and really look forward to continuing to work with you in terms of our future work as well. And the next slide, I think, will give us, provide our big thank you to all the fraggers in the audience, the OIPC and Janice and her wonderful group. And many of you. This is our contact information if you'd like to seek any more information about any of the work that we've presented today. Please don't hesitate to get in touch with any one of us. And then I thought we'd just leave a little bit of time, Gabby, if that's okay, for any questions. I see some coming in through the audience. So we're happy to, I'm wondering if everyone can join me on screen and then we can work through some of the questions.
Excellent. Before we get into questions, I just wanted to say a big thank you, Sarah, Eric, Karen, and Colin. That was excellent. Great to hear the updates on this project. So thanks so much for providing that. So the first question, can a provincial framework override local restrictions like no herbicide spraying with X meters of water, within X meters of water due to pollution of a water body?
So I can take that one, Gabby.
Sure.
So the short answer is no. And that's not what we would be proposing through the framework. But I think what the opportunity is there is the framework has an opportunity to do outreach and education for these municipalities so they really understand the science behind the use of herbicides and the lack of negative impacts potentially. So I think there's an opportunity through our communications and outreach strategy to help empower folks to have those conversations that I know are a bit tricky and are a bit of a barrier to controlling frag on the landscape. So provide information if anyone wants to reach out to me directly to help support. I've definitely been through a few of them with a couple of municipalities and other agencies. So happy to help.
Excellent. Thanks, Eric. All right, Colin, this one's for you, I believe. So does your costing exercise take into account the cost for restoration post-management?
It's a great question. We'd love to include some data on it. It's so variable, as I think we know and we've seen in terms of what restoration can look like. So it's a bit tricky, I think, for us to find a precise answer on that. It doesn't as it is right now, but if anyone would love to contribute data, I think that's exactly the kind of thing that would strengthen it in its next revision. So welcome all the restoration data you've got.
So another one here, noticing some of the partners shown on the slides and website, curious why the OPWG and OIPC are not identified as partners, especially as they have recently published the updated Phragmites BMP.
Yeah, I think I'm hoping that in our last slide we did include those as partners. I'm thinking when we put our partnership slide up, they were included. Of course, the updated Phrag BMP has been a tremendous step forward and been hugely successful and a huge effort in that. It's not that we didn't want to acknowledge the updated Phrag BMP, it's just that we were focusing kind of on the new efforts under the Green Shovels Collaborative. But I think you'll see our last partner slide did include both the Ontario Phrag Working Group and OIPC as well as partners. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we could have done any of this work without OPWG and OIPC, and maybe there's an opportunity to engage them further going forward in the Green Shovels work, because they've been a substantial partner to get us to where we are today. So thanks again for both those organizations.
Okay, so this one is from Michael. Is the native/non-native/hybrid screening test based on Doug Wendell's et al.'s protocol?
I guess that's me. I would have to verify that with our partner at Trent University. So it's Colleen Doyle we're working with, and she is, when I contacted her, it was a kind of general conversation around the tests they run and what they could do for us. I didn't think to ask what it was based on in the literature, but I can certainly get that answer.
Will this framework go out for review through the EBR, or will there be an opportunity for the public and interested stakeholders able to provide input?
I can take that one. So no, it won't be published on the EBR because it's not a provincial government product. But we've had several opportunities for the public and stakeholders to be engaged. So starting with going to them to get the information that we need to write the framework in the beginning, almost a year ago, plus those AGMs and outreach opportunities that we had mentioned in the deck a little bit earlier in January. The AGMs, the conference, the opportunities. We also posted on the greenshovels.ca website over the course of the summer and received a number of comments through that outreach as well. But if there's someone in the audience who feels like their voice hasn't been heard, feel free to reach out to myself directly and I'll work with you on some input as needed. Happy to incorporate as much diversity in the document as we can.
Great. Karen, I think this one's for you. What is the range of native Phragmites? Are there places where the test kits should be focused?
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the things I think we are missing is a comprehensive map of where native Phragmites really is. So I think that has been discussed at some of our Green Shovels meetings, and trying to think through, how do we pull that data together? So part of this screening program will include location data requests so that if it comes out native, then we know where those samples were taken and we can start kind of tracking some of that better. What was the second part of the question?
These things are moving so quickly here. Are there places where the test kits should be focused?
Yeah, we're working on how that might play out. Like I had said, like 200 kits, it's a small sample size relative to maybe what the demand might be. And further to that, if you have one stand that has multiple phenotypes within it, that one partner may require more than one sample to really gather what's going on at that site. So I think we're working with, first come, first discussion on what's going on out there. So if you really have an interest, please let us know as soon as possible, and we can do our best to figure that prioritization piece out on where these kits maybe need to go.
There might be a lot of us. I'm thinking there's
I
a couple
know.
people here that
That's
are interested. So
probably the biggest challenge we have with that program. And, you know, it's a pilot year, remember? So if we can't reach you this year, then the demand certainly determines or helps support additional resources becoming available to keep that service going.
well, that's great to hear. And if people did want to get a kit, Karen, is it you that they would reach out to, or?
Yeah, they can reach out to me by email for now, and then we're going to have some information posted on our website. We're promising by February 18th. I'm just kind of working with the university right now on some of that background information to prepare for kind of launching. So we'll get that up, and please keep an eye on the Green Shovels website in the meantime, or email me and I can make sure you're notified.
When will copies of the strategic framework be available through the Green Shovels?
Sure. Well, hopefully soon. It's been up and down on the website a couple of times now as we've had review periods. We're currently incorporating that provincial and federal government feedback, as well as updating the Indigenous involvement and perspectives into that document. So we hope to have a revised version up probably in the spring for additional comment, review, and for your nighttime reading pleasure.
Excellent.